Right. Okay, hopefully everybody can hear me reasonably well on my mic here. So just to start out, I've been working in various aspects of the waste industry since about 2005. I started in Hawaii, and in Hawaii, I was actively working as part of a landfill diversion grant. And through that program, we took green waste, which was basically yard, garden, brush clearing debris. And we also took untreated, unpainted pallets. And what we did is we processed those with an industrial grinder and made it into a soil amendment that we gave out to farmers. I did that in Hawaii for about 7.5 years. At that point, I transferred to a location on Maui. And in Maui, we operated a full composting facility. That composting facility handled the green waste and pallets that I just mentioned. We also handled biosolids, which is treated wastewater sludge that came from the wastewater treatment plant. We also handled the grit, which was often sand and other debris that got caught in the wastewater pump systems. And on top of that, we were partnered with Pacific Biodiesel, who took cooking oil and turned it into diesel, which they sold to various heavy equipment operations, the buses and power plants there on Maui. From them, we took the residual byproducts that came through their grease collections. Some of the food and other particulate matter that got screened out during the biodiesel production process. And we took all those items and we commingled them together and did a big aerated static pile. And within that pile, we composted the material down for 6 to 9 months. It went through several screening processes and rigorous testing to make sure that there was no harmful bacteria being passed on. And then once everything got cleared, finished, and tested, we then sold that product as an agricultural supplement. We are part of the USCC, which is the US Composting Council, and we were part of their program of testing assurances that made sure we were putting out a high quality product for farmers to use. So I left there in 2016. I was born and raised here in Fairbanks, and my family, my wife and I were ready to start a family, and we decided that Alaska was a little bit more of a reasonable place to live than Hawaii was. I know it sounds weird, but it was much cheaper and more affordable to live up here. So we made the commitment in 2016 to move, and we've been up here since then. And in 2018, I joined the Borough Solid Waste Division and have been working there this entire time. This summer, I was approached by the solid waste manager that ran the landfill and was informed that the central recycling facility manager was moving on to a new part of his life, and wondered if I was interested in taking over the helm of the recycling facility. And I was more than willing to give it a shot. It's a little different than what I've done in the past, but along the same lines of diverting material from the landfill. So that's where we're at today. And I think from there, I'll just go into the history of kind of the recycling center here in Fairbanks. As many of you know that have been here for a long time, there have been recycling programs on and off since probably at least the 80s. You know, you had newspaper for a while, and then aluminum's usually been a pretty steady one that's been recycled, but it's been here and there. Programs have come, they've gone. It's been hard to find consistency in what you can recycle and where you can take it. UAF had a good program for a number of years, but they had stopped doing that. So the borough said, what can we do to kind of streamline this, make there more of a central location for people to take a majority of their recycling goods. And, you know, in the past few years, They've done surveys at the transfer sites and online to try to find out people's interests in doing the recycling. And for the most part, most people have the desire to do some form of recycling. So the borough picked that up and ran with it, and they started up this program. There's still some other programs in Fairbanks that do certain types of material for recycling, such as K&K, which was the Bernie Carl business that does recycling, and their area is located on the Richardson on the way out to North Pole. There's CNR Pipe and Steel, and they're located there off of Van Horn. Both of those two businesses take ferrous metal, which is like iron-based metal, steel, iron, that sort of thing. And they also take brass and aluminum at those places. So you can always take material there. If you're in that area, those vendors tend to be for slightly larger, more commercial type recycling, but they will take some residential material as well. Items like plastic bags, not something we take here at the recycling center, but definitely something that can be repurposed here in the community. You can take those to places like Fred Meyer's or Walmart, or even directly to the food bank. The food bank tends to pick up bags from those locations. They'll reuse them in sending out their food packages to needy members of the community. Bags that can't be reused in that fashion can often be reused as a packing material, or in extreme cases, when they get to end markets, they can even make things like biodiesel or diesel out of these plastic products. There's some new presses that they've been able to actually turn some of this waste plastic into a fuel. So that's a good thing to do with those, because a plastic bag in a landfill can take up to 500 years or more to degrade. And even then, it tends to break down into microplastics rather than fully degrading back into its original state. Places like Walmart, Fred Meyer's, some of these larger box stores, they often have recycling programs built into their shipping systems. They'll take their cardboard, they'll bale it, they'll take their pallets, and they will use those pallets to put those bales of cardboard on, packing material, and they'll ship those trailers back down to the States or to a central location where they then combine them and then make a shipment down to the States. So we don't really get material from places like Walmart or Fred Meyer's or Safeway. They handle most of that in-house, and they resell their recycled products on their own. So that kind of decreases the burden on our community. That stuff, if it wasn't shipped back, would go into the landfill and fill us up even quicker than we already are. The landfill here in Fairbanks is projected to have a life that ends sometime between 2050, 2060. It all depends on how much material comes in that time period and how much we can divert away from it. We're on currently cell 3 in the landfill, and it can be projected to go up to, I believe, cell 8 or 9. We have cleared cell 4 and a new C and D cell, which will be like in the cell 5 area at this point. So the landfill takes up a lot of acreage. I think we're on 150 acres down there, just east of South Cushman. Many of you may be familiar with the old South Fairbanks landfill. That right now is currently our construction and demolition landfill. That's an unlined pile, whereas the cell 1 through cell 9 would be lined landfill, which is important because the location of that material is right next to the Tanana River, and we don't want any of those harmful chemicals leaching out into the water systems that can affect, drinking water downstream or fish habitat. So I know at least myself and many other Fairbanksans really love to do their fishing. So anything we can do to keep those fish coming in strong is important. Other items like packaging materials, you'll get bubble wrap or some of the new air packets now in the packing. A lot of times that can be taken back to places like the UPS or FedEx store, where they'll make it ready and available for people to use in their shipments. You can keep that for your own shipments to reuse. But items like that are not something that we currently recycle in Fairbanks. So you have to find an outlet for those. The Green Star of Fairbanks does have a nice little recycling guide that I will link here at the end of the meeting. And they have some of this information on it as well, where you can take this, some of the different businesses that accept the material. And that way, when you do your recycling, you have a guide of where you can go instead of running around and getting turned away at various different recycling areas. So that really helps. They do a great job of coordinating and helping the community come together and find out where they can take their different waste streams. Food waste is one of those other items that goes into the landfill currently that could theoretically be diverted. I know there is a few people in town that do vermiculture, that pick up food from either stores or restaurants. That's worm composting, where the worms are fed the food stock and then create a soil amendment from that. At some point in the future, if it could be deemed economically feasible, a composting facility could theoretically take a large amount of food waste and alleviate that from the landfill. These organic materials like food and paper that do go into the landfill, brush, grass, that sort of thing, those organic waste streams can make up to about 60% of the material that goes into the landfill. Those are also the main ingredients that generate methane, which is one of the biggest forms of greenhouse gas that you see being produced. So if we can eliminate some of those, we go a long way towards reaching some of the climate targets that have been talked about here in recent years to bring our emissions under control. That's pretty interesting, because Americans on a whole produce about 3 times per person the global average of trash, and then Alaskans tend to produce slightly higher than the average American in their trash disposal. So you can see per person, Alaska has a pretty high rate of trash disposal to the landfills. So anything we can do to kind of steer it away really helps us save space in the landfill. It makes the life of that landfill a lot longer. And landfills are one of those things where you don't really think about them till you show up there and use them. A lot of people, they put their trash on the curb or take it to the transfer site, and they don't think about where it goes. Well, we have that landfill there in Hilo. Let's say it closes in 2050 because we have a big increase of trash. That landfill still has to be monitored another 50 years after its closure as part of the EPA requirements. So not only are you going to have to build a new landfill, but we have to continually monitor that old landfill. So anything we can do to make that life a little bit longer is going to be an aid to the taxpayers of the borough. In addition to that, things like aluminum and plastics that we've been talking about here, they don't really break down. We're just burying them in a hole. Plastics are usually derived from oil byproducts. Aluminum has to be mined. So then we have to go and dig those out someplace else if we're not recycling the products that we already have. So right now, what we do at the borough is we collect this material from residents, from businesses, and we would like, at this time, we are currently selling that material to West Rock and Anchorage. At times when the market rates fluctuate, we sometimes have to pay for them to take it. But since I've been here, we've been pretty consistent in being able to sell the material, which is good because then it brings a little bit of a revenue stream in to offset the costs of the recycling program. So here at the CRF, which is the borough's portion of the recycling, we accept 7 different types of recyclable materials. And some of them are somewhat similar. So the first thing that we can usually easily identify is what we call UBC aluminum. And I know it's kind of blurry here. My camera likes to focus on my face, but this is just your regular average drink can. It could be juice, soda, beer, Monster energy drinks, all that kind of stuff. That usually has a fairly high resale value on the market. We will bale that up, usually a full bale of aluminum, being that it's so light, weighs between 200 and 300 pounds. And we will then sell that to West Rock Recycling and get some money back for it. So that's always a consistent moneymaker for the borough. The next thing that we bring in are number 2 plastics, which is called Hdpe. And that's the stuff that you'll tend to see that have seams on the bottles. This is something we see quite a lot of nowadays with COVID. We've got these handy wipes that you see everywhere. This is a classic example of number 2. It's a plastic. It's got a seam on it. It's got a number 2 triangle here on the bottom. A lot of businesses, a lot of residents have gone through a lot of these in the last 2 years. We'll definitely take this to recycle. This is another high value recyclable material that we can use here at the borough. Another classic example that you see in almost everybody's houses is we have the laundry detergent bottle. I guess it kind of helps that the logo is blurred out, so I can't be accused of advertising for one brand or another, but you can see this is also a seamed style bottle. It's white. It's usually a little bit thicker of a plastic than you would tend to see as a number 1. Here we have a milk carton. This is also a number 2. This is Hdpe, and that's high density polyethylene. That's what the Hdpe stands for. So again, it's detergent, milk jugs, coffee containers, shampoo and conditioner, this Lifeway milk bottle. We've got Hershey's chocolate bottles. All kinds of seamed plastic bottles that you get there at the store can be brought in for us. Now, again, I'll touch on this. We don't want plastic bags or to-go containers mixed in with these plastics because those aren't materials that can be recycled. I see a hand up. Helen, did you want to ask a question regarding this material?
Unmute. I always try to wash out things, but some of those things, if I had I don't have the chocolate thing, but I can't imagine washing that out and so forth. The laundry is really hard to wash out. So, I haven't done that. What do you do? What do you suggest?
So there's going to be some residual of detergent or other things in these bottles, and you're not going to get every single bit out. What we're trying to do is eliminate the majority of the material. So for like a laundry detergent bottle like this, if I was at home, I would put a cup of water in it, put the lid back on, shake it really good, and either pour it into the laundry or pour it down the sink, and call it good. It's going to dry out. You've got most of the residue out of there. It's ready to recycle. Again, your point with the chocolate, this is probably the hardest one to do. Again, when I finished using it, I just put a little bit of hot water in there, give it a good shake, dump it out. As long as there's not a thick layer of chocolate in there, it'll be fine. They're going to basically remelt, wash this type of material when it gets to the recycling facility end market. But what we don't want to see is somebody bring in a bottle like this with a whole 1/4 inch of hardened chocolate on the bottom. So a good faith effort is usually all that's required. Of course, we don't want motor oil in there. So, if you've got a bottle of motor oil and you just finished changing your car oil, that might have to go in with the other stuff. But most of these bottles that I just showed you here, it's usually fairly easy to give just a quick rinse and put them in the recycling. So that's a good question, because a lot of people don't want to have that, if we're hauling our own water, we don't want to waste a lot of water on rinsing trash, right? So that's a great question.
And how about labels on things?
So a majority of these things you can leave the labels on because, like I said, they're going to take them back and put them basically in kind of a washing vat before that they do anything. So things like this label, you don't have to worry about coming off. These paper labels on the milk bottles, not really a concern. That's something that they consider as part of the process. The one issue that I do see come up quite regularly, and I don't have an example of this right in front of me, is a local brewing company, Hoodoo. They tend to have a plastic label around their entire aluminum can. That would be one that you would have to take off if you wanted to recycle it. But there's not too many aluminum can products that come with a wrapper like that. So that would be the one exception. But most of these types of bottles, or even your number one plastics, like your drink labels, leave them on. We expect that to be there. If you want to take it off, great, but we expect that to be there. So that's not something that we require to be removed.
Is there any reason why the company puts that on?
Are you talking about the aluminum can that's wrapped locally here in Hoodoo?
Yes.
With a plastic label. I don't know all the specifics on it. It just happened to be that was the form that they started with. I know it's something that they've worked on because they have had customer input that wanted to recycle it. But I don't really know the details of why it is. I just know that that's one of the products that we have had an issue with in the past.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
We can all go over and get a beer and ask them to change.
Ask them to quit.
Well, on that note, I do know that they tend to sell like, I think 4 packs of their canned beer, and their plastic, I would call them, the 6-pack rings that you'd see on soda, but they have a 4-pack ring. Theirs is actually a hard plastic, and you can take those back to Hoodoo and they will reuse those. So they do a great job in that regards. Is that part of their packaging is definitely reusable. So hopefully they can figure out a label thing and we can be 100% recyclable from there. So that would be great. Okay, if I've covered that, I will go ahead and move on to the, let me finish up number 2, Hdpe. So one thing that we don't think about is, where does this stuff go, right? What do we do with it once it's recycled? So again, these detergent bottles, these number 2 plastics, these Hdpe. So some of the reuse items for that is like the Trex decking that you'll see that's become popular lately, that plastic lumber. You'll see park benches, park tables, furniture, tables, all that stuff can be made out of these recycled Hdpe or number 2 plastics. They can also turn them back into more detergent bottles and shipping pallets and shopping bags. So there's definitely a life for these once they get recycled. So they can make it back into the stream pretty quickly. And, some of those Trex decking and different park benches and stuff, they can last quite a long time, a lot longer than some of the traditional wood. So it's a good way to get that material reused. So moving on from there, I kind of split the plastics so that they didn't run together. I put them on opposite ends of my presentation so that it's a little less confusing, I hope. We will see if I made the right decision. So the next thing I want to touch on is some of the paper products that we can recycle. So while we are able to take office paper, newspaper, cardboard, and other types of mixed paper, we generally only have enough of a stream to do 2 types, and that's the old corrugated cardboard and the mixed paper. I'm going to touch on the mixed paper first because that is the majority of the material that you'll come across in your house. So that can be anything from office paper to note paper to what we call this box board, which is like your cracker boxes, your cereal boxes, You can see it's a hard paper. You'd almost say it feels like cardboard, but when you look at the end there, you can see there is no corrugation on that. So that's soda boxes, most of your 6-pack containers for beer, crackers, cookies, that sort of material. Any of your regular paper can go in there. Colored paper, white paper, it doesn't matter. We can commingle it because it's called mixed paper. Now, the one downside about that is when all that stuff is commingled, it has a slightly lower value than separated paper. But at this point, we don't have enough of an incoming stream or storage area to successfully divert what's called office paper or baled newspaper. Those would be slightly higher value than your mixed paper. And that office paper tends to be, just your more white type, office paper. That has a pretty high value comparatively if you can get enough of it and separate it out. Again, newspaper is also more valuable. We used to get pallets of newsprint from the news miner prior to them transitioning to their nonprofit status. We have not gotten any of that since, I believe, early FY19. So all of the newspaper that we do get tends to go in the mixed paper at this point. So we occasionally will have some cardboard in with the mixed paper. It's usually more to keep bale stability and to bind it all together. It's used on the outer layers to hold everything together, because mixed paper, especially if you have glossy paper, magazines, small paper, big paper, it doesn't hold together quite as well as some of the other materials that we have. So we'll put cardboard on a few of the sides. Yes, Carol, I see that your hand is up.
Yes, what about envelopes with clear plastic address places? And what about staples in paper that you have a batch of paper?
Okay, so we would prefer that you pull those staples out, any sort of metal binding out. We understand it might get missed. So there are contamination thresholds that we try to maintain, not to exceed, because we don't want to get end market rejection. But if you come in and you've missed a staple, we're not gonna, throw the book at you or something like that. We want to get that material in and we want to recycle it. We want to keep it out of the landfill because, those staples don't degrade in the landfill either. So we understand there might be some of that contamination. Those envelopes, personally, what I do is I don't spend a lot of time doing it, but I just try to do a quick rip of the envelope right around that plastic window. You don't have to do that, but if you want to do that, you're more than welcome to do it. I do it. I just give it a quick rip. It doesn't have to be perfectly clean. And, you're reducing the amount of plastic that's going in the recycling program, because that plastic isn't considered recyclable plastic anyway. It's going to go to the landfill. I'm just saving the end market the step of putting it in that big vat, mixing it around, and then they separate out the plastic and contaminants, the tape that you might see from like your cardboard. All that stuff usually gets pulled out when they're processing the recycling materials at the end markets. But I try to do my part and just rip off as much of it as I can when I can. But we understand you're not always going to be able to get all of it, and that's understandable. So again, if you want to do that, feel free.
Thank you.
You're welcome. So one nice thing that is done with the mixed paper, when we send our bales to Anchorage, some of it ends up being sold by the recycler, not by the borough, but by the recycler, to a business called Thermocool, and they're based in Anchorage. And they use the recycled fiber that's generated here in Alaska, and they make it into an insulation material. There's some information out there on the web. You can go check out Thermocool if you have interest in it. I don't want to spend too much time plugging it, but they're one of the main insulators in Alaska that use this alternative cellulose. So when that insulation is made from the cellulose, you're recycling it into a long-term use. That insulation is going to be in that house for quite a long time. And usually they can go 85, 90% of recycled product when they make that paper insulation. And that'll divert up to maybe 1 million tons of waste paper from landfills annually for these types of insulation projects. And so again, it reduces the landfill methane emissions. From what I've seen, there's not the concerns of mold or anything else any more than regular insulation. So that's promising. And again, they're using it material that's coming from Alaska here in Alaska. So you're not getting the greenhouse gas emissions of transporting it back and forth to the States. You know, if we had to transport it down and then send it back up as insulation, we're burning lots of diesel, lots of, you know, energy to get it back and forth. So the fact that they can use it here in state is really, really a neat thing. And it sounds like it's a pretty good insulator too. So it's really exciting that we can use materials here in the state and just shorten that process a little bit. So that's something
we've used that paper insulation in 3 houses now, I guess. And
More, is this thing?
What?
Going.
Okay, somebody was talking about the 3 houses that they use the insulation in.
oh, yes, I was just saying that it works very, very well.
Oh, good, good. Glad to hear it. I've heard that from others as well, but I have very little experience with the insulation side of it myself, so I wasn't too sure. But yes, I've heard lots of good stories about it. So that's an exciting use here. So again, for mixed paper, we want to stay away from things that are high contamination rates like napkins, paper plates. Paper plates is a big one, and you know, paper cups, because a lot of those have a waxy film around the outside. So anything with that waxy film, we don't really want, because that's not really easily to recycle. We don't want paper towels or tissues. Those tend to usually have other material on them that's not recyclable. We don't want photographs. We don't want hardcover books. If you have books that you want to bring to us to recycle, we just ask that you take those hardcovers right off of them. Another place to take books would be like the Literacy Council of Alaska, but they are a bit selective on what they can and can't use. So you might want to check with them before bringing them a load of books. But if they don't want it, we will definitely take it without the hardcover. If they're books with like the spiral binding, either plastic or metal, we just ask that you yank that spiral binding out and then we'll recycle the rest of it. So we will take that sort of thing. So
Paperbacks?
yeah, we can take paperbacks. The one thing that that we don't want to see is have someone maybe take an entire pallet of paperbacks and just drop it on us, because we usually like those to be in about 1/4 inch sections. So if you have the ability to, maybe give them a rip or a cut so that the paperback is in 2 pieces. Sometimes if you peel off the cover, those things just fall apart. We'll definitely take those. Paperbacks can be recycled. With the paperbacks, they just don't want to get a whole bunch of thick books, because those are really hard to bale. They don't compress. So we try to break up the material before we bale them. But yes, we will take paperbacks, definitely.
What about milk cartons, paper milk cartons?
Good question. So that would fall under the cardboard, which we haven't quite got to yet. Those milk cartons have that waxy residue on them, which makes them not recyclable. So those fall into the same category. As we don't see them much as consumers, but I also work in the restaurant industry, and we get a lot of our produce. You get meat in these cardboard boxes with a wax coating around them, and that's something that we can't take. So if that comes into us, we end up diverting it to the dumpster, which goes to the landfill. And again, you know, one of the big things that we always have to worry about in recycling is contamination. A lot of people tend to put everything to recycling, and what they don't think about is anything that we can't recycle, we have to pay to dispose of. So plastics that we can't use go to the dumpster. Paper that we can't use goes to the dumpster, and everything has an added cost. So if you can, again, if you don't know, you can always reach out or you can put it in there. But if you're putting in there a lot of stuff that we can't take, it's not necessarily helping the program. It's adding an additional cost. So sometimes it isn't always good to just throw everything in the recycling bin. We want to kind of tailor it to what we do accept, and different municipalities accept different things. Up here, we accept 2 main types of plastic. Other places I've seen 3, 4, or 5 types of plastic that are recyclable. So each municipality you go to has their own version of what's acceptable at their facilities, and it's always good to check. So great question, though. Great question. And I think with that, we may as well jump into cardboard because we're about there anyway. Did I have any other questions before I moved on to the next material?
I have a question. What do you
Sure.
think of glass? I know that right now we're not recycling glass. The university did for a while. I know they do in Anchorage. So what's it going to be for us?
Okay, I did have that later on, but I can
Okay.
jump into that right now if we want. I'm fine with doing that. So we don't accept glass. Now, when we first put out the request for proposals to various recyclers throughout the state, throughout the Pacific Northwest, we left it open. We did not get anybody who wanted to take glass for this recycling project. So we didn't accept it. Now, there's a couple reasons that people have not expressed an interest in glass. Main one is it's heavy. It's hard to transport. So if there's no recyclers in the state that are willing to take it, it's not really going to do us much good to collect it. Now, we do know a lot of people want to recycle glass. We understand that. One of the problems here in Alaska is we have a very cheap form of aggregate in that we have gravel pits left, right, and center. We got gravel pits everywhere, and it's cheaper to dig that stuff out of the ground than to try to crush the glass and use it as a aggregate. We would love it if maybe one of these construction companies or various enterprises on its own decided that they could make it profitable to take the glass and either mix it with the concrete or the asphalt or any of the other kinds of harder materials that maybe that they could find a use for it. But at this point, we haven't found anybody who has an interest in taking it from us. So, the university took it for a while, but I think they didn't have any great places to take it either. Now, that being said, if the glass goes into the landfill, it's not as much of a concern as some of these other items. Yes, it fills up the landfill. Yes, it takes up space. It is not going to release any sort of greenhouse gases on its own. When glass breaks down, it basically is inert. It's sand, and glass can be remade fairly cheaply. Now, there are places like in Europe, in Germany, you go, you buy a bottle, and you can return that bottle and get your deposit back right in the vending machine. Glass too. They'll reuse glass, up to 7 times. The US has not quite caught up with that trend in the reuse of glass, and it is one of the harder materials, especially for places like Alaska and Hawaii, Guam, Puerto Rico. Those places where we have higher shipping costs really have a hard time recycling the glass. So it is something that we are going to put out again. And if somebody says, yeah, we'll buy the glass from you, Fairbanks North Star Borough, we would then consider collecting it. But at this point, we have nobody that wants it. So we don't want to just collect it because we would just take it back out to the landfill, which is where it goes now.
Thank you.
You're welcome. Okay, so I will jump back up here to cardboard. So the one thing that's nice about the cardboard here in Fairbanks is we get a lot of it. And because we get a lot of it, we get a better price for it if we can segregate it into a pure load. We'll send different types of trailers out of this recycling facility here in Fairbanks. We have either mixed loads, which consist of all the recyclable materials on one trailer, and those go to Anchorage to be processed by West Rock, and they're usually split up and then repurposed into pure loads. and they go to their different distribution areas. But for cardboard, we can actually get enough material in, and we have enough storage space that we can send out about 1 pure load of cardboard a month. So that's like a 45-foot, trailer. You'll see like Carlisle or Tote or Matson, one of those trailers a month we can fill completely with cardboard. And instead of sending that to Anchorage, it goes directly to the port of Tacoma. And there in Tacoma, it's still West Rock, which is the one who purchases it from us, but they give us an extra $30 a ton for pure loads like that. And then from there in Tacoma, it gets taken to their facility right there in Washington, and they pulp it and they remake it into packaging material right there in Washington. So we're sending it straight to the source where it'll be reused. So cardboard is one of those things we get a little bit of extra money for. We could do that for mixed paper as well, but we tend not to get as much of that in as we get cardboard. Cardboard comes in pretty regularly here, and we get a lot of it. So it's one of those ones that can give us a little bit of an extra revenue offset when we do pure loads like that. So we really try hard to keep enough of it on the side out of our mixed loads to where we can do pure loads and make a little bit better of a return for the taxpayers of the borough in getting that money back. So that cardboard, it can be turned into new boxes, new cardboard packaging fairly quickly, and they do that right there in Washington. So that's a good use for it. There is kind of a pizza box thing, a pizza box myth, if you want to call it. So traditionally, not a lot of places want to deal with pizza boxes because there is a high rate of contamination. It tends to be on the bottom half of the box that might be oily. But if you have a pizza box that's clean, you don't have oil stains, you don't got cheese stuck on it, you can totally recycle that as cardboard. We'll take it. West Rock wants it if it's clean cardboard, keeps it out of the landfill. There's no need to segregate it just because it used to be a pizza box. Really what they want to avoid is that contamination issue. So again, in the recycling industry, I can't stress it enough, contamination kills programs. So we want to keep that clean cardboard coming through, and we'll divert that dirty cardboard straight to the landfill where it belongs. Again, that waxy cardboard is something we see come in every once in a while. You get a lot of businesses, restaurants, you have employees that, deservedly so, don't know about the different grades of paper products. They're just throwing stuff away. Their bosses told them to recycle the cardboard, so we'll get a few of these waxy boxes in. No big deal. We'll divert them back to the landfill. But what we don't want to see is we would hate to see like an entire bale of waxy cardboard come in and be left with us, because then we got to dispose of it, So again, cardboard, really easy. It's pretty straightforward. It's all this corrugated stuff. I know it's kind of hard to see. I'm trying to get a good angle here, but most of you know what a corrugated cardboard looks like. And it is okay if it's got like the smooth color on the outside. You'll see TV boxes, basically any type of box that you would see that's corrugated cardboard will have some sort of, color and writing on the outside. All of that is fine. Amazon boxes are fine. You get your paper towel, toilet paper roll tubes, that all counts as cardboard. That can be recycled. One that a lot of people don't think about, egg cartons, that'll definitely go in your cardboard recycling and can be repurposed. So those are some standard types of cardboard that you see all the time. Again, if you can pull most of the tape off, great, but we understand that there's going to be some tape on cardboard boxes, so we're not going to hammer you for that. So there's definitely some material here that you can cardboard, get out of your trash. If you're paying for City of Fairbanks pickup, that's all that stuff that doesn't have to go to the bin. You don't have to worry about getting an extra pickup because, you've generated too much trash that week. You're trying to divert these recyclables out so that you don't have to worry about that, So cardboard's one of those ones that we like to see come in. And main thing, just like the other materials, if it's soaked in oil, throw it in the trash. Don't bring it to us. If it's so sopping wet that we have to wring it out, that's probably not going to be something we can use either, because we have to have it dry before we can bale it, because 2 reasons. We're going by weight, so nobody wants to pay for water weight. And 2, we don't want it to mold or mildew the entire bale of cardboard, which makes that whole thing get thrown out. So if it's wet, we're going to try to dry it if we can in a short period of time. We don't have a large amount of room to just let it sit for a long time till it dries. So we try to keep it clean and dry coming in, and we turn around, bale it right up, and get it out of there as fast as we can. Some of you may or may not know, at this point, we work out of a leased half warehouse from UAF here on Marika Street. So our space limitations are part of our concern. So we have to keep baling continually to try to keep those stockpiles down so that we can keep the new material coming in. So it's really a dance of getting that old material out as quickly as we can so that we have plenty of room for the new stuff coming in. And cardboard's one of those things that we get a lot in. It's our biggest volume material that we have on a weekly basis. Just one company tends to bring us between 2.5 to 4.5 tons a week. And at least since I've been on here, we have been able to turn around all the cardboard every week, which has been a big help in keeping that facility clean and running smoothly. So again, bring us more. We'll try to deal with it as best as we can and make some room. Yes, I have a question, it looks like, from Anne. Maybe not. Okay. If you end up having a question, just pop in and I'll get to you, Anne. I thought you might have a question there.
I have a question.
Yes.
Sometimes I pick up stuff from the soup kitchen, and a lot of that's the heavy cardboard, but some of it is little boxes of thin stuff. Should I put those extra in a plastic bag or something so that that's separated?
So most of the time that thin stuff you're talking about is considered this box board, and I would
Yeah.
put that with your mixed paper. That would go with your mixed paper. So yeah, separate it out from your cardboard. Really with the cardboard, try to focus on the corrugated stuff, the tubes, and stuff like the egg cartons there. So, and anything else is probably going to be mixed paper. Okay, I will go ahead and move on, and feel free to jump in at any time. You guys have been doing great about keeping me on my toes. The next thing I'm going to talk about is peat, or polyethylene terephthalate. I know it's a mouthful. That's why we call it peat for short in the industry. That's your #1 plastic. It's actually the chemical name for polyester. So I'm sure many of you have heard that term before. You see that in clothing, carpeting, all kinds of stuff. And that #1 is a really versatile plastic. You'll see it in anything from like Gatorade bottles to vitamin and supplement bottles. We've got coffee creamer bottles. We've got barbecue sauce, ketchup, condiments, and the ubiquitous water bottle. So PET is another one of those high value recyclables, a plastic that's recyclable. And you know, almost all like 2-liter bottles, drink bottles, you know, water bottles, all that stuff that we sell in the US is pretty much all in #1 plastics, and that can be recycled. We ask that you take the lids off. If you don't, it's not going to be a deal breaker. Most of the plastic recyclers will take the plastic lids because they can be recycled too. The one issue that we have with the lids, and it's kind of twofold, is one, if it's got a lid, sometimes that means they didn't wash it out. And of course, we don't want any, you know, barbecue sauce in our plastic because that doesn't do us much good. But the other issue is when we put bottles into the baler like this with the lid on it, and we push that baler down with a couple thousand pounds of pressure per square inch, those lids will shoot off and we don't want anybody to get hit in the face, hit in the eye, working around the baler. So it's partially a safety concern, partially that it's just a slightly different type of plastic. Although it can usually be recycled, we don't want to take on the hassle of, removing the lids ourselves and possibly causing injury to one of our employees. So that's why we kind of tend to ask you to remove those lids. Again, if we have a 1 or 2 lids in a big bag of bottles, we're going to just ignore it. But if you come in with, a whole truckload of bottles with all lids on them, we're going to be like, hey, take those lids off for us, will you? So again, we like that polyester plastic. It can be reused. This number 1 polyester plastic, peat, it can be washed and remelted. Some of the new uses after recycling, you'll get bottles and jars that you see here. You've got carpet, clothing, different kinds of straps and roping that can be made out of it, auto parts. The fiber filling for the inside of your winter jackets is often made out of recycled plastic like that. So there's lots of uses for it. And those number 1 plastics make up about 1% of the total waste in the United States. So recycling those can definitely put a dent in the waste stream. Of course, we want the bottles to be empty. We don't want them full of water or liquids. We don't really want oil in them. And again, we prefer no lids. So that's the basic rundown for our basic main types of recycling here.
Matt,
Yes, Barbara?
I have a question on, and I know you can't take them, but medicine bottles, what could we do to try to get those medicine, there are billions of them.
Yes.
End up, in the water, oceans. What could we do to help change that?
Now, those are one of the other types of plastic. So again, there are municipalities that you could probably recycle those in. We are not one of those areas that have had anybody willing to buy that material from us.
Mhm.
It would be great to be able to figure out a reuse for them. As a homeowner, you could reuse them in various ways. I don't have a great solution for the borough for those medicine bottles at this time. Reuse them if you can, give them away to people if you can, but you're right, that is definitely an issue that the US has to deal with and kind of get a little bit more of a consistent stream from community to community to hopefully recycle some of these materials. I'm not certain, but I think a lot of those medicine containers are number 5s, and they
Yep.
are recyclable. I know in Hawaii we used to recycle them, and in a lot of the other states. So it's just one of those things. It's like glass. If we don't have somebody that's willing to buy it from us or take it from us, we aren't collecting it.
Do
I
you
have a
know?
comment.
Do you know the trucks that go back from groceries?
Whoever was talking, I lost you there. Talking about the trucks coming back from the grocery stores?
Yes.
Okay.
Do they go back empty, or can they be filled with things?
Good question. So I kind of touched on that a little bit earlier. So places like Walmart, Fred Meyer's, Safeway, some of those bigger stores, they often have recycling programs as part of their internal policies. And places like Fred Meyer, Safeway, and Walmart, they'll rebale their cardboard right on site, and they put them back into those shipping containers, and they send them back to their main distribution hubs, and they'll combine the different recycling from the different stores. So like maybe all the Fred Meyers in Fairbanks will combine all their recycling with the Fred Meyers in Anchorage. They send it out to their central place in the Pacific Northwest, who then sells it to a recycler. So a lot of those bigger box stores have that already. What we do here is we have an agreement between West Rock, who is the purchaser of our recyclables, the borough, and a group called ALPAR, which some of you may be familiar with. It's the Alaskans for the Prevention of Littering and Recycling. I think I might have that. Alaskans for the Prevention of Littering and Recycling, I believe is the full name of it. What they do is they help fund the trailers, so that the trailers we're sending down to Anchorage are trailers that have brought goods up here to Fairbanks in the first place. And what Alpar does is they help defray the cost, and they take those trailers that would normally be headed back down to Anchorage empty via truck or rail, and they let us fill them with recyclables. So we get kind of a discounted rate on shipping that recyclable material back down to Anchorage. So that is something that we do, is we try to not let these trailers go back carrying airspace, because it's just a waste of fuel if you're shipping an empty trailer. So anything that can be reused like that, we try to do. And especially places here like Fairbanks that are kind of the end of the road for a lot of these trailers, they're either on the train or on the truck. They're not really going far past us. So we try to put material back in them and send them back down. So that's a great question.
Thank you.
You're welcome. I think
And-
Carol has her hands up, or
Yes,
if you had
please.
another one. Okay.
I found out at Fred Meyer one day that I could order 3 months supply of my medicine at once. So therefore I only used one medicine bottle for the 3 months instead of 3 separate ones. So ask if you
Great.
can do that.
Great. Okay.
And then the other thing, I really wish that people, like for shampoo and conditioner and stuff, I wish there were manufacturers that would sell it in like a bar soap, so that you wouldn't have to deal with the plastic at all. I'd rather not use it rather than have to worry about recycling it.
Right. That's a good point. Now, I haven't seen this up here, but I do know there are places that have started, stores that are starting to install more like a bulk dispenser for those products, like shampoos and conditioners, to where you can go and refill your bottles. I haven't seen anything like that up here in Alaska, but that's a great way to go, so that you can either reuse what you have, or like you said, go in the bar form. And a lot of that is going to be pressure from consumers. Some municipalities have talked about writing in legislation or bills about a producer responsibility. So let's say you're a Walmart, a Fred Meyer's, a Safeway, and you're going to sell a TV. So some municipalities have actually written it in to where if you're going to sell these goods that, are hard to deal with on the waste end, you either have to pay a fee for the goods or be willing to take back a certain amount of that recycling materials and deal with it as a company. So that's definitely something that either we as a community or individual consumers can go to these organizations and say, hey, what can we do here? And, there's only so much power you have as a municipality versus as a consumer, and how you choose to spend your dollars. So I would recommend that, there might be a few stores around that do something like that, like a bar for shampoo or soap or conditioner, and, support those things with your dollars, and let it be heard to those that do the ordering for the stores around here that that's something you're interested in, because they're not going to bring it into us unless they can make profit on it. And that's what we find a lot of times. That's in the waste industry. If we got to have cooperation from all sides: the consumer, the producer, the seller. Everybody's got to chip in to deal with the trash issue. Hopefully that answers your question, Carol. I have a hand up from Helen.
Yeah, I've got a radio which works, but the tape recorder doesn't.
Okay.
What is the best thing to do with that? I
Okay.
could take it over to Value Village, or I could bring it to you, or
So here's kind of the rule of thumb on that. If you're going to take it to a place like Value Village, the Salvation Army, they're going to want stuff that primarily works. They want more stuff that works than not works. Places like Value Village, when they have donations that they can't use or they don't deem is going to be profitable reselling them, they will just take them to the landfill and dump them. The recycling facility does accept all different types of electronics. That was one of the things that we were going to touch on here, and this is the perfect time to jump into it. It was next on my list. So here at the recycling center, we, under a separate contract, and that contract is with Green Star of Interior Alaska, we have gotten them to take the electronic recycling for the borough residents. So things that we take here include TVs, monitors, VCR, DVD players, tablets, smartphones, computers, laptops, modems, all the accessories for the computers like the cords and the cables. We take printers, scanners, copiers, microwaves, radios. We take household batteries. We take ink and toner cartridges, and basically all the small household electronic appliances. And we'll take that here at the recycling center, and then we pay Green Star to go ahead and recycle those. For
You mentioned
item
cassette recorders.
cassette recorders would be under the radios, usually radios or something
Yeah,
like
because
that.
the cassette recorder part doesn't work, but the radio works fine.
Right. So if it was something you decided to part with, we would definitely take it here at the facility. Again, if you're going to donate it, really check with the entity that you're donating it to, because I've worked in some of the thrift industry before, and a lot of people would be surprised at how much material is just thrown out because it's only partially usable. So always check with who you're taking it to if they're going to be able to reuse it or resell it. And if not, that means they're probably going to throw it away. So it's a great question. And yes, we will take it. Things that we tend to avoid are things like, we don't want any AC or refrigerator type units because those have Freon and have to have the gas removed. Now, what we would recommend if you have something like that is go to the landfill. It's free for residents to take there. And the landfill, as part of their program, brings in Freon removal specialists every year to deal with stuff like ACs, fridges, freezers, that sort of thing. So that's all free. And then once that Freon is removed, we'll send that unit over to CNR Pipe and Steel to recycle all the metal components from it. And then whatever's left over, like that foam insulation in your fridges, the rubber weather stripping, that'll end up coming back to the landfill. So you're starting with a fridge and ending up with a small amount of insulator material that ends up in the landfill. So we try to divert those as well as we can. Things that we don't want here at the recycling center, gas motors, of course, gas, oil contamination. Again, that stuff can all go to the landfill. CNR Pipe will drain any fluids out of any motors and then take the metal for the recycling. We don't want vacuum cleaners here at the central recycling facility, and that's like a couple reasons. One is a lot of people don't take their dirty bags out of the vacuum, so it's a contamination issue, it's a health issue, allergy issue. Another part is something like a vacuum has very little electronics in it. It's usually some copper and a small electric motor. So stuff like that, if you really want to get into the weeds, you can pull out that motor and take it to CNR or bring it to the landfill and dispose of it free residentially. But most of something like a vacuum is non-recyclable anyway. It's a different type of plastic that we use. So we try not to take vacuums here. We take this.
Question.
Yes.
Question, CNR, are they accepting tin cans again or not?
As far as I know, last I heard, they are not taking the tin cans. They
Yeah.
had a lot of issues with contamination in them. But last
Oh.
I heard, K&K Recycling was still taking the tin pet food and human food cans.
Oh, thank you.
Yes, but again, they're a little farther out of town. And again, you can always call these people the day that you're ready to do your recycling, or maybe once a month if it's something you want to recycle on a regular basis, because they will say yay or nay depending on how much space they have, what the market price is, that sort of thing. So it's always good to double check before you take it down there. But yes, K&K at this point, as my understanding, still does take the pet food and human food tin cans or steel cans.
And what
Bi-metal.
about small batteries?
Small batteries can come here. We take
Oh.
all kinds of the round batteries, the long batteries, the computer batteries, basically anything that you'd find as far as household, phone, computer, all that, but all those batteries can come here to the central recycling facility, and that falls under the recycling contract. What we don't want to see here is things like golf cart batteries, 4x4 batteries, vehicle batteries of any kind. Those are considered lead acid batteries. And we take those at the landfill free of charge for residents as well. So there's another way to dispose of them. Vehicle batteries also often, the stores where you buy a new battery will give you $10 to bring in the old battery. So that's a great way to do it too.
Thank
You're welcome. Other electronic items that we don't want to see here at the recycling center, and this is more because they're considered hazmat, hazardous materials. Thermostats containing mercury. We don't want to see exit signs, smoke detectors, or fluorescent light bulbs. Those are all things that require special handling and aren't really appropriate for here at the recycling facility. Afterwards, when I link the Green Star, I know it's blurry, the Green Star recycling guide, they say that that you can get boxes for these fluorescent tubes at places like North Coast Electric, and they will handle that recycling for you. Again, I told you vehicle batteries, we can take to the landfill. Smoke detectors, I'm not sure on those. I think there's a limited amount of those that they can take through the household hazardous waste program at the landfill, but that would be something to check on before you brought it down. Most of the time, you're not going to have a lot of those unless you're doing some sort of renovation in your house or you have a failure of a unit. So that's not something we see very often. But I think that covers basically what the type of electronics you'll see in your house. Are there any other electronics that maybe you can think of that we don't see on a regular basis that you had a question about? Anybody? I'm not seeing any hands on that one. Okay. So I think
I've got a question.
Yes, go ahead.
The stuff that goes to the transfer stations, any of that go to you, or does that just say that if I dropped off flashlight batteries in the hazardous area in the transfer station, does that just go to the landfill?
So usually that'll go through the landfill's household hazardous waste department, and they have contractors such as NRC, US Ecology, and they'll ship those out as part of their monthly hazardous waste material shipment. We just did one yesterday. Again, it's usually like a 50-foot trailer of, drums and barrels and all that oil and antifreeze that we collect at sites, paint, limited amount of batteries, all sorts of stuff. So if you put it at the transfer site in that household hazardous waste area, it's handled through the household hazardous waste recycling part of the program. If that makes sense. Was that Dawn? Is that who asked the question?
Yeah, that's fine. Good answer.
Okay, thank you, Dawn. So that covers most of the recyclable materials we have to talk about. Again, I've touched on that it either goes down to Anchorage or Tacoma, depending on the size and the weight of it. They might rebale some of it before shipping it out. One of the big things that's happened in the last couple of years that really shook up the recycling industry, and some of you may know about this already, is China instituted this program. I believe it was called National Sword. And what it did is prior to 2017, Alaska and a lot of the other industrialized countries in the world were just sending literally tons and shiploads and containers full of recycling to China continually. We did this in Hawaii, scrap metal, all kinds of stuff. What was happening was those containers were getting over to China and they were finding that they had really high contamination rates. And so then they were taking all that contamination and they were burying it into Chinese landfills. Now, China is a pretty big country. They got a lot of people, but again, landfill space, wherever you go, is usually a premium space. It takes a lot of material. It takes a lot of energy and resources to deal with it. So they were becoming kind of a overflow landfill for the rest of the world. Now, when they were getting the recycling, that was great. They were turning around those plastics, making them into new products, putting them on containers and shipping them right back to the US. Same with steel. They were melting that down, making new products, shipping it back to us, shipping it back to Europe. But again, they were getting contamination. So just for example, the steel, some of the examples, they would open a shipping container and find that, yes, they were sent a bale of steel, but in the middle of that bale of steel was rocks and gravel and contaminants. And so they're paying by weight for not only the material, but somebody pays for the shipping too. And then they're having all this material that they couldn't use. So in 2017, they notified the WTO that they weren't going to take certain solid waste and recycling scrap into their country. So that really threw the world recycling markets into a tizzy, because at that point, the US was sending pretty much everything that we recycled out. It was either going to Mexico, it was going to China, it was going out of the US. So for the past 4 years, the US recycling industry has been trying to ramp up to recycle things at home, so that if these kind of policies go into effect in other areas, such as South Asia, India, which is, South Asia as well, but usually considered a little bit different from the rest of the area down there. So once China stopped taking some of that material was diverted to those other countries. They're dealing with the same contamination issues. They don't want to deal with the contamination issues any more than China or the US does. So the US has been working really hard to ramp up some of their recycling capabilities. And that, along with some of these supply chain issues that we've seen in the last 2 years, have led to prices going up for recycled materials. So we're actually seeing some positive pricing for, paper, fiber, aluminum, plastic, and we're actually able to make some money off of this. And so in a way, China almost did us a favor by not taking it. It forced us to look at what we were dealing with here and say, hey, we need to deal with this at home. We need to make this a little more environmentally sound. Recycling is great, but if you're shipping it halfway across the world, how much are you actually doing to make the world, more carbon neutral? So it's one of those things we have to kind of think about. Let's see, in China in 2018, which was right around the end of their taking the recyclables, they took 775,000 tons of plastic from the US and another 55,000 tons from Canada. So, and that was 2016. And so they reported those numbers in 2018, right after they cut off the recycling imports to China. So you can see a lot of material was going over there. A ton of plastic is a lot, because say these HDPEs that we talked about earlier, or these #1 plastics, when you do a bale of those, it's several hundred pounds. So when you're looking at, 4, 5, 6 bales of plastics for a ton of material, that's a lot of plastic. So you can see these numbers like 775,000 tons would just be mountains of plastic if they were here in landfills. So you can see that we were definitely shipping a lot of stuff after that. Those numbers went down from those numbers that I just told you down to almost nil. And so we had to find a way to deal with all that plastic that we were previously shipping out. So we've done a pretty good job of turning the market around and creating those opportunities here in the United States. So that's something we can be really thankful for. One of the things that we can do to eliminate this is, carry your own refillable water bottle, so that you're not buying one of these plastic water bottles every time you're thirsty. You see more and more institutions and businesses putting in those water bottle refilling stations. That's great. That'll help eliminate it. I make my own coffee in the morning. I have my own coffee cup. I have my own thermos. I don't stop at the coffee cart. Now, it's a little tricky one for me, because I like supporting our local businesses too. So any of those businesses that are willing to refill your reusable mug, that's great. That's going to keep stuff out of the landfill. And, a lot of those food and beverage things aren't as recyclable as some of the other products. So those are always things to think about, is where is that product going to go when you're done using it? You know,
So are you still recycling electronics?
yes, yes. So we have a contract through Green Star of Interior Alaska. They take all those electronics that I listed earlier, items like cell phones, tablets, computers that have a hard drive. They have a multi-stage process of making sure that personal data is wiped and destroyed from those units, and they're either recycled or repurposed depending on where they're coming from and the ability to destroy any information that's left on them. So yes, we do the electronics recycling, and Green Star has several different outlets depending on what the material is as to where they send it to be recycled.
Thanks.
You're welcome. So if you look at the numbers, things like aluminum are really easy to recycle and can be reused over and over and over again. Cardboard, reused, recycled over and over and over again. But only about 9% of the material that is possible to be recycled is actually recycled in the United States. So this can be a resource in the future as mining costs go up, material costs go up. If we can start reusing this and repurposing this instead of just burying it in a hole, it can definitely provide a lot of industry, jobs here onshore. So this is all stuff that can really impact different types of communities and really be a positive for the country. For plastics, for example, there's a couple different kinds of ways that they can recycle it. One is through heat compression. It's pretty popular in the US, Australia, and Japan. It recycles all different kinds of plastic at once. It takes unsorted and clean plastic, and they mix it in these huge tumblers. They heat them, they mix it, and they convert it into a new plastic material. And the nice thing about that heat compression is it can, like I said, take different streams of plastic and put them together. Another one is, I think I touched on this earlier, is they have found some positive results in doing some compression, turning plastics into a diesel fuel that they can run generators, trucks, that sort of thing off of. So if it can't be recycled, there's still a possibility of utilizing it rather than dumping it into a hole. Another type of plastic recycling that they do that's gaining popularity is monomer recycling. And that's like a chemical process where they reverse the polymerization of the plastics in order to recycle similar types of plastic polymers. And that purifies and cleans the plastic, and they're able to make new plastics out of that material too. Cheryl, did you have a question?
I was wondering what percentage or how much of the borough is actually recycling? I know when I'm over there, I see a few cars usually, but are we doing a good job, a poor job, and how much more capacity do you guys have?
So we do have more capacity, and we would like to see increases over the next few years. We could definitely see a much bigger increase if we have a more permanent facility. Right now, we're on a lease with UAF, and we're actually waiting to hear from them if they want to extend our lease here at this facility this next year. So what we can do is, at this point, if you look at our average numbers, because day to day it's all over the place, but so for the first quarter of FY22, which is July through September, we averaged 119 residential customers per day and about 3.5 commercial businesses per day. They're open Tuesday through Saturday from noon to 5:30, or Friday to noon to 5:30, Saturday 9 to 5. So in that time, we're taking that kind of numbers of people. We had a diversion rate of about 0.85%. So that's not even a full percent. And we'd like that number to go up. However, that 0.85% is a slightly higher percent than we've had in the past. So that number is going up. It's going up slowly. But again, it's something that we'd like to see increased to divert material out of the landfill. We have the ability at this point to take an increased amount of materials. We have a commercial application process for businesses to tell us what they'd like to come in so we don't get swamped and overwhelmed all at once. But as far as residential customers, we can definitely take an influx of more residential customers. We'd like to see that number get up to over 150 users a day, for residential customers from the 119 that we're at now. So we would definitely encourage you to recycle what you can and bring in what you can. If you don't feel like recycling all the different streams that we have, don't feel that you have to. If you only want to recycle one of those streams, we'll take whatever you want to bring us.
Thanks.
You're welcome.
I was wondering, I'm getting a little confused between you're talking about we, and then you're talking about Green Star as though it's a separate entity. And when I go over to wherever it is in Aurora to recycle paper, I think of that I'm going to go to Green Star, and they've got the electronics, they accept electronics there. But then you've got a place on Well Street, I think, where you do the is that Green Star? What's what?
Okay,
And
good question.
where's
Good
your
question.
office? And
That's
so forth.
That's an excellent question. So the leased warehouse on Marika Street, which is in the Aurora subdivision that you're bringing your paper to, that used to be where Green Star operated out of. Their new location is, I believe, that Well Street location. Green Star is contracted by the Fairbanks North Star Borough to take the electronics that we collect here in the Aurora Marika warehouse. They also do their own separate electronic recycling at their facility. So when I say we here at the CRF, we're talking
What's
about
CRF?
the Central Recycling Facility.
Okay.
That is the Marika Street in the Aurora subdivision recycling facility that's managed by the borough. So the borough leases the warehouse. We provide the balers and the equipment. That facility is employed and staffed by the Fairbanks Rescue Mission. They have the contract to run that facility.
Right.
Green Star has the contract to take the electronics that are collected at that facility, and the borough manages and oversees the program and coordinates the contracts between the buyers and the sellers of the various recycling materials. My office is here at the Marika Street warehouse, but I am at the warehouse next door in the building that's actually a borough-owned building, and it's the facilities maintenance building. We own this building. The Marika Street warehouse where the recycling is done right next door is not owned by the borough. That is a UAF building that we lease. Does that answer your question?
Yeah, thank you.
You're welcome.
So Matt, it's getting on 4:30 here,
Okay,
and I think that was an excellent talk.
okay,
And I think we learned a lot of information, and I look
Okay.
forward to sending out the link to everybody.
great.
Do we have any last minute questions?
Yeah, can
Yeah.
I ask,
Just a thank you.
can I
Yes.
ask a question? And I came in a little late,
Sure.
but up here, and I took an Ollie thing on the recycling options. In Maine, or in the, the Portland, Maine area, they have single stream recycling, and they can recycle like pretty much all their plastics. Up here, we can recycle plastic number 1, but it's very confusing because the clamshells, from what I understand from like when John Davies gave a presentation, the clamshells number 1 has a slightly different chemical makeup, and that different chemical makeup is considered a contaminant. So why don't they have like a 1A, 1B designation? Because it's very confusing to people that they're all listed as number 1, but we can only accept like, say, water bottles and say pill bottles, but not clamshells. And so I think a lot of people don't get it, that not all number ones are alike because there's no sub designations.
That is a great point, Alice. That was something I was going to bring up. I have a clamshell here that's marked as a number one. I think we got a little distracted and I got off my flight path there when I was talking about the number ones, but that is a great point because like Alice said, you'll see these food clamshells, tomatoes, berries, that sort of thing. And you flip them over, they got the triangle, it says number one on it. Now, again, this kind of goes back into the same category as the glass. It's what our purchasers are willing to take. The people who responded and say they want to take the material from us do not want those materials. And like you pointed out with Mr. Davies, the composition of those clamshell plastics is slightly different than those bottle plastics, and they don't want to combine them together. Now, some of the municipalities are closer located to some of these places that do the heat compression recycling, where those different types of plastics can be commingled. And I think that sub-designation is a great idea, but that has to be done industry-wide for the whole country if they're going to do that. And so as you know, getting everybody to do the same thing can be quite a challenge, but that is a great idea. I would love to see something like that because we do get a lot of those clamshells, and if people include them in their bags and they get into our containers, yeah, we just end up throwing them away. But yeah, it is confusing. And until I worked here, I had a hard time myself, navigating this process. So I would say when in doubt, just ask. But that is a very good point. Sometimes it's very confusing. You may have missed the part where we talked about the difference between cardboard and boxboard, but there's a lot of similarities there too. So that is a really good question. And again, not one that we have a great answer for at this point, but it is something that we don't take as far as the clamshells.
Matt, I was always told that it has to have a neck in order to be recyclable.
So that tends to be kind of what she was touching on, is that there's different types of number ones. And it tends to be that any of these bottles with the necks, with the smaller openings on the top than the body, are what you'd like for the recyclable materials because they're all made out of the same plastics. Now, when you get to number twos, that's a little bit different. There, you can see things like these white containers or these coffee containers from like Folgers.
Oh,
And technically they do have a narrower neck. It's just such a short neck that it's hard to see. So that's a great question. That is a really good rule of thumb to help you sort through some of your plastics. So if your number one is a clamshell, it doesn't have a neck, you don't recycle it with us. So that's a good rule of thumb to remember. And it's true most of the time. Things that can be kind of confusing is like, if you look at these two plastic items, they're both plastics. They both have a spot for like a snap-on lid. This Cool Whip container in my hand, it's a number 5. And this wipes container in my left hand is a number 2. Now the difference is the number 2s have a seam on it. So that's another thing you can look for when distinguishing some of these, because sometimes the numbers are really hard to see on the bottom of these bottles. So yeah, it definitely is a challenge to work your way through the recycling world. And I totally understand that it can be confusing. It is for a lot of people. So again, with some of those other municipalities, when you recycle, single stream recycling like that, it'll go to a facility called a MRF, and that stands for Material Recovery Facilities. I've toured a few of those. They often have a warren of conveyor belts and personnels and machines that are, doing visual scans, different types of light scans to pick out the recyclable streams and the non-recyclable streams. So a lot of those lower 48 municipalities, they have that option to send it to someplace that can do a little more advanced sorting than what we can do up here. Up here, we just have the bins and the guys working the balers, and they're sorting it out of a bin by hand as they go. So we're not as advanced as some of those recycling programs that have been in place 25, 30, 40 years. So that's a great question.
All right. Thank you so much. And I
Sure.
look forward to getting the email, and I will send it out to everybody. And then, like Matt said, it'll have some links and PDFs, right, with some of this
Yes.
information.
Yes,
Looks like Barbara might have a question, though.
certainly.
Barbara?
No, that's a clapping hand,
Oh,
not a raised hand.
okay.
I'm just
And-
saying, thank you.
You're welcome.
What a wonderful talk.
Let me check
Yes,
the
thanks a
chat,
lot,
make sure
Matt.
I didn't miss anything there. Okay, link to the poster. Oh, yes, here's a good point that somebody made in the chat that didn't get touched on. If you have cats and those empty cat litter buckets, the one thing that we'll use them for here is we'll put all the batteries in those when we ship them out. They're great containers for that. So even though we don't necessarily recycle them, we'll take a small amount of those clean buckets of cat litter, empty cat litter containers, and we will ship our household batteries to Green Star with those. So that's a great point. And I think that was the only statement question in the chat there that I needed to touch on. Everybody else was kind of thanking you, or thanking me. So I'll get those links over to Joy, and if you ever have any questions, feel free to give me a call or an email, and we'll get you going in the right direction.
Who knows, maybe next summer we could do a tour.
Oh, I would love that. That'd be great.
cool.
Hopefully we can be back to normal by then.
Awesome.
Thank you so much for having me.
Thank you. That was a great talk.